Have you ever felt that sharp sting of criticism, the kind that lingers long after the words are spoken? Maybe it was a harsh comment from a coworker, an unfair judgment from a family member, or even the relentless voice in your own head. That moment when criticism hits, it's easy to feel defensive, hurt, or even crushed. But what if I told you there's a way to not just endure criticism, but to transform it into something powerful, something that fuels your growth rather than wounds your spirit? That's exactly what the ancient philosophy of Stoicism offers us, a set of timeless tools to handle criticism with grace, dignity, and unshakable inner strength. Think about Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who faced endless scrutiny and pressure, yet wrote in his private journal, "The obstacle is the way." He didn't see criticism as something to fear or avoid. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity, a chance to refine his character, to practice patience, and to rise above the noise. This is the Stoic mindset. Criticism isn't a setback, it's the very thing that sharpens us. And today, we're diving deep into 20 Stoic insights that will help you do the same. We'll explore how to master your emotions, shift your perspective, and cultivate unbreakable self-mastery, so no amount of criticism can knock you off course. Imagine a life where criticism doesn't derail you but strengthens you, where you don't just survive judgment, you thrive because of it. That's the power of Stoicism. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending criticism doesn't hurt. It's about understanding that you control how you respond, how you grow, and ultimately, how you let these moments shape you. Whether you're dealing with unfair critiques, harsh opinions, or your own self-doubt, these principles will guide you toward a calmer, more resilient version of yourself. So let's begin this journey together, because the way you handle criticism says everything about the life you're capable of living. The first and most fundamental Stoic insight for handling criticism comes straight from Epictetus, the former slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers. He drew a simple but life-changing distinction. Some things are up to us, others are not. Picture this: you're in a team meeting, and a colleague harshly critiques your project. Their words not up to you, the heat rising in your cheeks, that immediate urge to fire back. That's where your power lies. Epictetus put it bluntly: if someone tells you you're a donkey, smile and move on. He wasn't suggesting we ignore feedback, but rather that we stop giving strangers and critics the keys to our emotional state. Think about the last time someone's criticism kept you up at night. What if, instead of wrestling with their words, you'd asked yourself one question: is this within my control? The tone they used, the assumptions they made, those belong to them. Your focus, your growth, your next steps, those are yours alone. This is where true freedom begins. When criticism comes, the Stoic doesn't ask, "How can I change their mind?" but rather, "What can I learn here?" Maybe there's a grain of truth to examine. Maybe there's simply an opportunity to practice patience. Either way, you walk away unshaken because you've anchored yourself to what you can actually influence. The world will always have opinions. Your peace comes from knowing which ones deserve your energy. Seneca once observed that criticism often acts like a mirror. It reflects far more about the person delivering it than the person receiving it. Imagine standing in front of someone who relentlessly points out flaws in others. After a while, you start to notice something revealing. Their critiques say nothing about you, and everything about what they fixate on, what they fear, or what they refuse to see in themselves. This is the heart of projection theory, the idea that people project their own insecurities, biases, and unresolved issues onto others. Take the example of a boss who snaps at an employee over minor mistakes. On the surface, it seems like a critique of the employee's work, but dig deeper, and you might find a leader drowning in pressure, taking out their stress on the nearest target. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly when he wrote, "It's silly to let others' words dictate your self-worth. Those harsh words, they're not a verdict on you. They're a window into the critic's inner world." Think back to a time when someone's criticism felt unnecessarily personal. Maybe it was a friend who mocked your ambitions, or a family member who nitpicked your choices. Now ask yourself, what if their words had nothing to do with you at all? What if they were simply revealing their own fears? Fear of failure, fear of change, or even fear of being left behind. When you see criticism through this lens, it loses its power to wound. Instead, it becomes data, a clue to understanding others better, and a reminder not to take their projections as truth. This isn't about dismissing all feedback, it's about developing discernment. The Stoics didn't advocate ignoring criticism, they taught us to examine it with calm curiosity. Before letting someone's words sink in, pause and ask, is this about me or is this about them? More often than not, you'll find the answer shifts your entire perspective. Suddenly, the critic's voice grows quieter and your own clarity grows stronger. That's the power of seeing criticism for what it really is, a reflection, not a definition. There's a moment between criticism and reaction, a sliver of time so thin most people miss it entirely. That's where the Stoics built their fortress of self-control. Picture this, you're scrolling through social media and someone leaves a biting comment on your post. Your fingers hover over the keyboard, itching to fire back. That's the crossroads. React now, and you're playing by their rules. Pause, and suddenly you're in charge. Epictetus gave us the ultimate question to ask in that split second. First, say to yourself what kind of person you want to be. Not what they deserve, not how to win the exchange, but who you choose to be in that moment. The difference between an impulsive reaction and a measured response isn't just time, it's intention. One comes from ego, the other from wisdom. Think about how flame wars escalate. Someone tosses a careless insult. The other person, stung, retaliates with twice the venom. Before long, it's a spectacle, one that leaves everyone diminished. Now imagine the alternative, a breath, a deliberate step back, maybe even deleting the app entirely for an hour. The Stoic pause isn't about suppression, it's about elevation. It's the space where you reclaim your power to act rather than react. So what's your go-to pause tactic? It could be as simple as counting to 10 or as deliberate as asking, will this matter in a week? Some people physically walk away, literally creating distance between the criticism and their response. Others write out their raw reaction, then delete it. The method doesn't matter as much as the habit, inserting that buffer between stimulus and response. Because here's the truth, criticism tests your character far more than it tests your ideas. And every time you pause, you're not just avoiding a misstep, you're sculpting the person you're becoming. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal for this very reason. He'd write reminders like, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That's the pause in action, choosing integrity over instinct. Because when you master that moment, criticism stops being something you fear and starts being something you use, not to prove others wrong, but to prove to yourself what you're made of. Imagine if every critic in your life was secretly working for your growth, not because they want to help you, but because their jabs and judgments are the perfect training ground for resilience. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private notes about difficult people, they're like weights at the gym. The heavier they are, the stronger you become. That's the radical reframe Stoicism offers. Your critics aren't obstacles, they're unpaid coaches, drilling you in patience, focus, and emotional endurance. Take professional athletes as an example. Basketball players don't crumble when fans scream from the bleachers. they use the noise to sharpen their concentration. Tennis stars like Serena Williams have talked about turning booze into fuel, channeling that energy into their next serve. What if you approached criticism the same way? That coworker who nitpicks your reports, they're training you to communicate with unshakable clarity. The relative who mocks your life choices, they're giving you daily reps in staying true to your values. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase for this: the best revenge is not to be like your critic. When someone throws petty remarks, responding with dignity isn't just maturity, it's mastery. Think of it like a martial artist using an opponent's momentum against them. The critic expects you to lash out or shrink back, but when you respond with calm precision, you're not just deflecting their words, you're proving their irrelevance. Here's a challenge: the next time criticism lands, pause and ask, what skill is this moment teaching me? Maybe it's patience with ignorance, maybe it's thicker skin. Maybe it's the art of letting go. Every critique carries a hidden curriculum if you're willing to enroll. The Stoics didn't just tolerate critics, they thanked them. Because iron sharpens iron, and the friction of judgment, that's what polishes your character to a shine. Consider for a moment the vastness of the cosmos, the billions of galaxies, the infinite stretch of time, the countless lives that have come and gone. Now bring to mind that criticism that's been weighing on you, the snide remark from last week's meeting, the disapproving comment from a relative. Seen from this cosmic scale, how much does any of it truly matter? This is what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, one of the most liberating tools in Stoicism. He'd remind himself, keep the universe in mind, and most things seem trivial. History gives us striking examples of this perspective in action. Take Abraham Lincoln, who faced relentless criticism throughout his presidency, called a tyrant by some, a weakling by others. Newspapers mocked his appearance, rivals questioned his intelligence, and yet he famously responded with a shrug. If I were to read, much less answer, all the attacks made on me, this shop might as well be closed for any other business. Lincoln understood that most criticism fades into irrelevance when measured against what truly endures: principles, purpose, and the long arc of progress. Here's a simple but powerful question to carry with you. Will this matter in 5 years? The coworker who rolled their eyes at your suggestion, the stranger's harsh online comment, will any of it linger, or will it dissolve into the background noise of life? This isn't about dismissing feedback, but about discerning what deserves your emotional investment. Most criticism isn't a verdict, it's a fleeting moment, as temporary as a cloud passing the sun. Think back to a criticism that once felt crushing. Maybe it was a rejection letter, a harsh performance review, or a personal attack. Now, with time's clarity, how much does it truly weigh? That's the gift of the cosmic perspective. It doesn't erase pain, but puts it in its rightful place. The Stoics weren't asking us to pretend criticism doesn't sting. They were teaching us to zoom out, to see the bigger picture where our worth isn't defined by passing opinions, but by the choices we make again and again. So the next time criticism lands, pause, look up at the sky, literal or metaphorical, and ask, in the grand scheme, does this change anything that truly matters? You might find the weight lifting before your eyes, leaving only what's worth keeping: the lesson, the laugh, or the freedom to simply let it go. Seneca once described humor as a shield, not to block criticism, but to let it glance off without leaving a mark. Picture this: a Roman senator hurls an insult across the forum, expecting Seneca to bristle or cower. Instead, Seneca laughs, turns to the crowd, and says, "Thank you for giving me so much of your attention." The insult collapses under its own weight, and the would-be critic is left disarmed. That's the power of wit. It doesn't deny the criticism, it transcends it. Modern comedians master this art daily. When a heckler shouts, "You're not funny," a skilled performer might grin and reply, "And yet you're still here." The audience laughs, the tension dissolves, and the critique loses its sting. This isn't about mockery or deflection. It's about refusing to let someone else's words dictate your emotional weather. Seneca put it beautifully: laughter disarms malice. When you respond to pettiness with humor, you reveal its insignificance without sinking to its level. Think of the last time someone tried to undermine you. What if, instead of stiffening, you'd playfully agreed, "You're right, I am terrible at this. Thank goodness I have you to point it out." Suddenly, the critique becomes a shared joke, and the critic's power evaporates. Humor works because it shifts the frame. It takes the energy of the attack and redirects it somewhere harmless, even joyful. Here's a challenge. Pick one recent criticism and reframe it with a touch of lightness. Maybe a coworker nitpicks your presentation skills. Respond with, "Guess I'll cancel my TD Talk audition." Or a family member scoffs at your cooking. Five-star chefs started somewhere, probably not here, but still. The goal isn't to dismiss feedback, but to drain its venom. Because when you laugh with the moment instead of wincing at it, you're no longer a target. You're the one holding the shield. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best defense is not to become like your adversary. Humor lets you do exactly that: rise above pettiness while keeping your spirit intact. After all, what stings more to a critic than realizing their words didn't land? Not anger, not defensiveness, just a smile that says, "Nice try." And suddenly, you're not just handling criticism, you're rewriting the rules of the game. Here's a powerful filter the Stoics used to separate useful criticism from noise: 3 simple questions that can save you years of unnecessary stress. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Picture this. A friend pulls you aside after dinner and unpacks a laundry list of helpful observations about your life choices, your career path, your dating habits, even how you raise your kids. Their words sting, but before you let them sink in, run them through this Stoic triple test. First, ask, is it true? Not does it feel true in the moment, but is there objective evidence? If someone says you're careless with money, but your budget spreadsheet says otherwise, that's not feedback, that's their projection. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, knew this well. Only the educated are free. Here, educated means learning to discern fact from opinion. A critique about your actual missed deadlines worth examining. A vague, you're irresponsible. That's just someone's mood in sentence form. Next, is it kind? Not soft or sugar-coated, but delivered with basic respect. There's a world of difference between your presentation lacked data, here's how to strengthen it, and you embarrassed yourself up there. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should treat others as if they're acting from genuine belief, so extend that same grace when assessing critics. Was their intent to build you up or knock you down? Harshness often reveals more about their limitations than yours. Finally, the most overlooked question, is it necessary? Imagine your friend's advice is about your hobby of painting landscapes. They say you'll never be professional. Even if that's true, which it might not be, ask, does saying it help anyone? If not, it's just noise. The Stoics believed unnecessary words were like pouring water into a full cup, pointless overflow. Now, here's your challenge. What's one critique you've been carrying that fails this triple test? Maybe it's an old teacher's offhand remark about your limited potential, or a partner's frustrated jab during an argument. Run it through these 3 questions. If it doesn't pass all 3, imagine placing it in a mental trash bin labeled, "Not my burden to carry," because that's the secret criticism only sticks if you stop to glue it down. The rest, let it blow past like leaves in the wind, while you keep walking your path, lighter and freer than before. There's an almost magnetic pull to defend ourselves when criticized, to correct the record, to prove we're right, to make them understand. But what if the real power move wasn't engaging at all? Picture a seasoned diplomat at a press conference, fielding aggressive questions with the same unflappable calm as if someone had asked about the weather. No raised voice, no frantic justifications, just a steady presence that makes the criticism seem small by comparison. That's the Stoic art of non-defensiveness, not because you lack conviction, but because your piece isn't up for debate. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 means nothing." Think about that for a moment. 10,000 voices could shout that the sky is green, and it wouldn't change a single law of nature. So why do we treat personal criticism like it holds some ultimate truth? The Stoics recognized that defensiveness isn't about protecting facts, it's about protecting ego. When someone says, "You're terrible at this," and you scramble to list your accomplishments, you're not arguing with them, you're arguing with your own fear of being inadequate. Now imagine this, the next time someone critiques you, you simply don't defend. Not with silence that simmers, but with quiet assurance that says, "I hear you and I'm still at peace." A colleague questions your competence. "I appreciate the perspective." A relative scoffs at your life choices. "Interesting take." No counter-arguments, no justifications, just a gentle refusal to play the game. History's most resilient figures mastered this. Eleanor Roosevelt faced relentless public scrutiny, yet she famously said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." That's non-defensiveness in action, treating criticism like a passing gust of wind, not a storm you need to weather. When you stop defending, something remarkable happens. Critics lose their leverage. Their words hang in the air, unanswered, until even they realize how little weight they carry. So here's the challenge. Pick one interaction this week where you'd normally jump to explain yourself and don't. Just observe what happens. Does the criticism grow louder, or does it fizzle out when it meets no resistance? The Stoics knew that every time you refuse to defend, you're not losing ground. You're reclaiming the only territory that matters, your inner freedom. Because true confidence isn't proven, it's lived, and nothing proves it quite like the ability to stand firm while letting words meant to shake you simply pass by. Seneca had a radical way of framing critics. He called them our adversarial allies, the people who unwittingly sharpen us through resistance. Picture a young novelist receiving their first brutal review. The words sting, clunky prose, predictable plot. At first, it feels like a knockout punch, but then something shifts. The writer reads the critique again, this time with detachment, and spots a pattern. Their dialogue does need work. That harsh review just handed them a free masterclass in improvement. Seneca observed this phenomenon centuries ago when he wrote, "No tree grows strong without constant wind." The very forces that seem hostile are often what give us depth and resilience. History brims with examples of this paradox. Beethoven composed some of his most revolutionary works as his hearing deteriorated. J.K. Rowling refined Harry Potter after multiple rejections cited its unconventional length. In both cases, resistance wasn't a barrier, it was a whetstone. The Stoics took this further, suggesting we should thank our critics, not because their delivery was kind, but because they revealed blind spots we might have missed in an echo chamber of praise. Marcus Aurelius even kept a mental habit of translating insults into lessons. Someone calls you arrogant, that's an invitation to practice humility. A colleague dismisses your idea. A chance to communicate with more clarity. Here's the transformative shift. Criticism stops being about them, their tone, their motives, and starts being about you. What can you extract from this to grow? A sculptor doesn't curse the chisel for biting into marble. They use its sharpness to reveal the statue within. Your critics, intentionally or not, are chiseling your character. The key is learning to hold the tool yourself, to decide which strokes to heed and which to ignore. Think back to a piece of criticism that initially felt crushing but later proved valuable. Maybe a coach's blunt feedback improved your form, or a friend's honesty about your short temper sparked real change. That's the hidden gift, the critique that irritates like sand in an oyster, only to help you produce a pearl. So the next time criticism lands, try Seneca's reframe. This isn't an attack, it's raw material. The wind howls not to break the tree, but to teach it how to stand. Imagine walking into a job interview fully prepared, not just for the expected questions, but for the brutal ones too. The interviewer leans forward and says, "Frankly, your experience is lacking. Why should we hire you? If you've rehearsed this scenario, the real thing loses its power to paralyze." That's the essence of Premeditatio Malorum, the Stoic practice of anticipating criticism before it happens. Epictetus called it rehearsing your troubles in advance, not to dwell on negativity, but to drain fear of its poison. Think of it like a fire drill. No one hopes for flames, but practicing evacuation routes means panic doesn't take over when smoke appears. The Stoics applied this to criticism by asking, "What's the worst someone could say?" Then they'd sit with that imagined critique until it felt mundane. Marcus Aurelius did this daily, writing, "Begin each day by telling yourself, I shall meet the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful." By expecting harsh words, he wasn't defeated by them. Here's how it works in practice. Suppose you're terrified of presenting at work because last time a colleague interrupted with, "This data is useless." Instead of avoiding the spotlight, try this drill. 1. Write down their exact words, "This data is useless." 2. Sit quietly and let the phrase hang in the air. Notice your pulse quickening. That's the sting you're inoculating against. 3. Craft 3 calm responses. "Let me clarify the methodology," or "Which metrics would be more helpful?" Or even, "I appreciate direct feedback." Epictetus warned, suffering arises from resisting reality. When we pretend criticism won't come, it hits like a sucker punch. But when we've already faced it in our minds, the actual words feel like reruns, predictable, almost boring. So ask yourself, what criticism keeps me up at night? Fear of being called fraudulent, boring, unqualified. Now imagine hearing those words spoken aloud. Sit with them until they're just sounds, not verdicts. That's the detachment drill, not numbing yourself to feedback, but proving to your nervous system that you can handle it. Because once you've weathered the worst in your mind, reality's barbs can't pierce as deep. History's great performers use this technique constantly. Comedians anticipate hecklers, musicians prep for off-key notes, even athletes visualize missed shots to stay steady under pressure. The critic's voice only shakes you when it's unexpected. Premeditatio Malorum turns it into background noise, a script you've already read, leaving you free to focus on what truly matters, your growth, your purpose, your unshakable core. There's an almost electric tension in silence, a space where words could live but don't. The ancient Stoics understood this power better than anyone. Take Cato the Younger, a Roman senator who faced relentless public mockery for his uncompromising principles. Crowds would shout insults as he walked through the forum, calling him stubborn, ridiculous, out of touch. And what did Cato do? He kept walking. Not a clenched jaw, not a muttered rebuttal, just serene indifference. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a masterclass in self-possession. Marcus Aurelius later captured this perfectly. Silence is a lesson learned from the many sufferings of life. Now contrast that with our modern impulse to overshare, to explain, to justify. Social media has turned silence into a vacuum we rush to fill. Think of the endless clapbacks, the public rebuttals, the urge to have the last word. But here's the paradox: the more you explain, the more you hand your critics ammunition. Silence, on the other hand, is a fortress. When someone throws a verbal jab and you don't flinch, their words hang in the air, unanswered, until even they feel their weightlessness. Consider a courtroom scene where a witness refuses to be baited. The lawyer's voice rises, demanding a reaction, but the witness simply waits, calm, unmoved. That silence isn't empty, it's deafening. It shifts the power dynamic entirely. The Stoics recognized this. By refusing to engage, you reveal the critic's need for your reaction. Their words only matter if you treat them as currency. Think back to a moment when silence served you. Maybe it was biting your tongue during a family argument, or choosing not to respond to a passive-aggressive email. That restraint didn't mean you were defeated. It meant you were directing the play instead of being a character in someone else's drama. Silence is the ultimate veto power. It says, "This conversation doesn't get to continue unless I allow it." Marcus Aurelius journaled about this often, reminding himself that the best answer to anger is silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of sovereignty, the kind that comes from knowing your worth isn't up for debate. So the next time criticism comes knocking, experiment with saying nothing at all. Watch how the absence of your voice amplifies your strength, because sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what you say, it's what you don't. Every great chef knows the secret to a perfect dish isn't just skill, it's the willingness to taste their own cooking with brutal honesty. Imagine a Michelin-starred chef who receives a complaint that the soup is too salty. They could dismiss it as one customer's opinion, or they could do something radical. Take a spoonful themselves and ask, is there truth here? That's the essence of the Stoic self-audit, a deliberate pause to examine criticism not as an attack, but as potential data for growth. Seneca nailed this when he asked, "Who profits from your anger?" The moment we react defensively, we miss the chance to mine criticism for gold. History offers a striking example in Thomas Edison, who famously reframed failures as feedback. When critics mocked his early light bulb prototypes for burning out too quickly, he didn't rage against their skepticism. Instead, he documented every failed filament in notebooks, treating each critique as a clue. That's the self-audit habit in action, turning external noise into internal progress. The Stoics took this further by making it a daily ritual. Before bed, they'd review the day's interactions, asking, "Where did I stumble? Where did criticism sting and why?" Not to wallow, but to distill wisdom. Here's how to practice it. Next time criticism lands, borrow the chef's approach. 1. Pause the emotional reaction. Imagine setting the comment on a mental lab table for examination. 2. Ask Seneca's question. If I strip away the tone, is there a useful core? A boss snaps that your report was disorganized. The delivery stings, but the insight, "Could my structure be clearer?" might be a gift. 3. Act on just one takeaway. The chef doesn't overhaul the entire menu, they adjust the salt. Think of a recent critique that ruffled you. Maybe a friend said you've been distracted lately, or a colleague hinted your meetings run long. Now flip the script. What if that comment held a sliver of truth worth exploring? Not to indulge the critic, but to empower yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment becomes the way." Criticism, when audited wisely, isn't a roadblock. It's the signpost pointing you toward your next breakthrough. So here's your challenge. Pick one piece of feedback you've resisted and give it the Stoic lab test. Not to accept it blindly, but to ask, even if 90% of this is noise, What's the 10% that could make me better? That's the alchemy of self-audit, transforming leaden words into golden growth. Your phone buzzes with yet another notification. Someone's left a scathing comment on your latest post. Your thumb hovers over the screen, torn between reading it and swiping it away. This is where the Stoic concept of prosok attention discipline becomes your superpower. Epictetus didn't just suggest guarding your mind, he commanded it. The mind is like a fortress. You decide who gets entry. Think about that for a moment. You wouldn't let a stranger barge into your home and dump trash on your floor. Yet how often do we grant that exact access to our mental space? Consider the ancient practice of prosok as building an emotional firewall. Just as your computer blocks malicious software, you can train yourself to filter toxic inputs before they hijack your peace. Take the example of a journalist who mutes Twitter notifications while writing, not because they fear criticism, but because they refuse to let random voices derail their focus. That's prosok in action, the deliberate choice to protect your attention like a sacred resource. Marcus Aurelius modeled this daily, writing, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought." Every piece of criticism you entertain reshapes your inner landscape. Now, apply this to your own life. What voices are you allowing past your gates? The coworker who constantly undermines your ideas, the relative who thrives on negativity, even the algorithm feeding you outrage-inducing content. Prosok asks you to audit these inputs ruthlessly. A practical starting point: try a 24-hour attention fast. Silence non-essential notifications, skip the comment sections, and observe how much lighter your mind feels. You're not avoiding reality, you're curating it. Epictetus gave us the ultimate litmus test for what deserves mental real estate. Does this concern what's within my control? If not, it's noise. The next time criticism arrives, pause and ask, will engaging with this make me wiser, kinder, or more effective? If the answer's no, that's your cue to raise the drawbridge. Because the most powerful response to criticism isn't always a rebuttal. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to hear it at all. Think of your attention as the most valuable currency you possess. Every time you spend it on petty critiques, you're investing in someone else's agenda instead of your own growth. The Stoics didn't advocate ignorance, they championed discernment. So what's one input you've been tolerating that no longer deserves a VIP pass to your mind? Delete, mute, or walk away your fortress, your rules. There's a powerful image from ancient Stoicism that changes how we weather criticism. Zeno's metaphor of the ship in a storm. Picture a vessel battling towering waves, the crew soaked and weary, but the captain stands steady at the helm. Why? Because he knows something fundamental. No storm lasts forever. The winds will ease, the clouds will part, and the sea will calm. That's the essence of the long game mindset, recognizing that most criticism, no matter how fierce, is temporary. Marcus Aurelius echoed this when he wrote in his journals, "Time erases all, not some, not most, all." Consider J.K. Rowling's journey with Harry Potter. 12 publishers rejected her manuscript, some with brutally dismissive notes. One even scribbled, "Children just aren't reading these kinds of books." Fast forward a few years, and those critiques didn't just fade. They became footnotes in a story of unprecedented success. The critics hadn't changed their minds. Time had simply revealed how little their opinions ultimately mattered. That's the Stoic perspective in action. Today's cutting remark is tomorrow's forgotten noise. Now apply this to your own life. Think of a criticism that once felt like a defining verdict, a teacher's doubt, a boss's harsh evaluation, a public embarrassment. How much does it weigh now? Chances are the sting has dulled, or the context has shifted so dramatically that the words barely resonate. That's the gift of the long lens. The Stoics weren't asking us to pretend criticism doesn't hurt. They were reminding us that pain, like everything else, is subject to time's erosion. Here's a practical exercise. The next time criticism lands, pause and ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years, 5 months, even 5 weeks? You'll often find the answer puts the moment in perspective. The coworker's snide comment, the social media jab, the relative's unsolicited advice, these aren't eternal judgments. They're gusts of wind, loud but fleeting. Marcus Aurelius would carry this further, suggesting we visualize our lives from our deathbeds looking back. What critiques would still seem significant then? Almost none. This isn't about dismissing feedback, but about discerning what deserves your emotional investment. The long-game mindset doesn't make you passive, it makes you patient. It's the difference between reacting to every ripple in the water and steering steadily toward the horizon, knowing storms are just weather, not destiny. So the next time criticism tries to capsize you, channel Zeno's captain, adjust your sails, keep your course, and remember, this too shall pass, and when it does, you'll be miles ahead while the critics are still shouting at the waves. Epictetus offered a radical lens for viewing critics not as adversaries to defeat, but as human beings convinced of their own rightness. He wrote, "When someone insults you, remember they act from the belief that they're correct." Think of the last time someone cut you off in traffic, honking wildly. In the moment, it's easy to label them as reckless or rude, but zoom out. Maybe they're rushing to a hospital or they've just received crushing news. Their behavior reflects their inner world, not your worth. This is the compassion shift, recognizing that harsh words often say more about the critic's unseen struggles than about you. History gives us a profound example in Abraham Lincoln's treatment of his political rivals. When Edwin Stanton publicly called him a long-armed ape early in Lincoln's career, most expected retaliation. Instead, Lincoln later appointed Stanton as Secretary of War, recognizing his competence despite the personal slights. When questioned, Lincoln simply said, "He's the best man for the job." That's Stoic compassion in action, separating the critic's pain from their potential value. Consider the last criticism that stung you. Maybe it was a professor's blunt feedback, a partner's frustrated remark, or an anonymous online jab. Now, imagine the critic's backstory, the sleepless nights, the insecurities, the pressures you can't see. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who lash out often feel threatened or powerless in other areas of life. Their words aren't bullets aimed at you, they're distress signals disguised as daggers. Here's a simple but transformative exercise. Next time criticism lands, pause and silently wish the critic well. Not as performative kindness, but as mental recalibration. Picture them as a child, innocent, uncertain, doing their best with the tools they have. The ancient Stoics called this sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all people through shared fragility. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The offender needs your help," he wasn't suggesting you tolerate abuse. He was reminding you that anger always masks deeper wounds. Think of compassion as emotional armor, not softness, but strength. A master swordsman doesn't fear a blade because they understand its weight and balance. Similarly, when you grasp that criticism flows from human pain, it loses its power to destabilize you. The next time harsh words fly your way, try Epictetus's question. What if this person truly believes they're helping? Even if they're wrong, that shift in perspective can turn resentment into curiosity, and sometimes even gratitude. After all, the harshest critics often become our greatest teachers if we let them. Marcus Aurelius left behind a treasure trove of wisdom in his personal journals, not polished philosophies, but raw, unfiltered pages where he processed insults, setbacks, and daily frustrations. One of his most practical habits, writing down every slight, then dissecting it with the precision of a scientist examining a specimen. Picture this, the Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in history, sitting by lamplight, jotting down someone's cutting remark from the Senate floor. But here's the key: he wasn't venting, he was depersonalizing. His pen transformed criticism from a wound into data. He'd analyze the words, is this true? If so, what can I learn? If not, why does it bother me? This wasn't diary keeping, it was emotional alchemy. Modern psychology backs this practice. Studies show that writing about negative experiences for just 15 minutes a day reduces stress hormones and improves problem-solving clarity. Think of it as a mental detox, pouring toxic thoughts onto paper so they lose power over you. A tech CEO recently shared how she uses this method. Every morning, she spends 5 minutes scribbling down critiques from the previous day, investor doubts, employee complaints, even her own harsh self-talk. Then, with coffee in hand, she reviews them with detachment, asking, what's useful here? The rest she literally crosses out. By breakfast, the sting is gone, leaving only actionable insights. Marcus Aurelius' journaling had a crucial rule: write to clarify, not to brood. There's a fine line between processing and ruminating. Stoic journaling isn't about replaying grievances like a broken record. It's about holding them up to the light until they shrink to their true size. Try this tonight. When a critique lingers in your mind, grab a notebook and answer 3 questions. 1. What exactly was said? No interpretations, just the words. 2. What's the worst possible truth it could imply? Often, saying it aloud reveals how absurd the fear is. 3. What's one small step to either improve or let go? A musician used this method after a scathing review called his performance soulless. Instead of spiraling, he wrote down the critique, then listed 3 technical areas he could refine. 6 months later, that same critic praised his emotional depth. The words hadn't changed, his relationship to them had. So here's your prompt. What critique have you been replaying in your head that needs journaling? Not to dwell, but to disarm, because when you give criticism a page to live on, it stops renting space in your mind, and that's when you reclaim something priceless, the freedom to grow without carrying the weight of every word thrown your way. Imagine stepping into a courtroom where you're not the defendant, you're the judge. The critic's words aren't arrows aimed at your heart, they're exhibits laid out for your impartial review. This is the Stoic role-playing trick, a mental shift so powerful it can turn even the fiercest criticism into a classroom. Seneca urged us to play the part fate gave you, and here's the twist: you get to choose which part. Are you the wounded recipient or the sage observing with calm curiosity? Picture a seasoned judge listening to a heated argument. They don't flinch when voices rise or facts get twisted. They lean in, weigh the evidence, and ask, what's useful here? That's the energy you channel when you adopt the sage role. A coworker dismisses your idea in a meeting. Instead of shrinking, you become the observer. Interesting, why does this perspective trigger them? Is there a valid concern beneath the tone? Suddenly, you're not reacting, you're analyzing. History's great problem solvers used this technique instinctively. Benjamin Franklin, when faced with opposition, would imagine himself as a neutral mediator. I made it a rule, he wrote, to avoid contradiction and assertiveness, instead posing as a humble inquirer. By mentally stepping outside the conflict, he disarmed critics and often uncovered collaborative solutions. The Stoics took this further, suggesting we rehearse these roles daily. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself, you're an actor in a play, play your part well, whatever it may be. Here's how to practice it today. The next time criticism lands, pause and visualize draping a philosopher's cloak over your shoulders. Ask, how would my wisest self, the version of me grounded in patience and perspective, respond to this? Maybe they'd nod and take notes. Maybe they'd smile and change the subject. The key isn't the specific reaction. It's the space between stimulus and response that the role creates. Consider a musician receiving a harsh critique from a talent scout. As the raw sting fades, they slip into the sage role. Is this scout known for spotting raw potential, or do they prefer polished perfection? Does their taste align with my artistic vision? The critique hasn't changed, but the framework around it has. Now it's not a verdict, it's market research. Seneca's advice to play your part wasn't about performance, it was about perspective. When you step into the sage's shoes, you're not pretending to be unbothered. You're accessing the part of you that genuinely isn't, because deep down you already know. Criticism only defines you if you grant it the authority. So why not hand the gavel to your wisest self instead? They've been waiting to take the bench. Anger at criticism functions like a bizarre tax, one where you pay with your energy, yet the critic never sees a dime. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "Your mind takes the color of your thoughts. Picture your emotional reserves as a bank account." Every time you seethe over a cutting remark, you're making a withdrawal not from the critic's account, but from your own. And what do you get in return? No interest, no growth, just an overdraft of exhaustion. Think about the last time someone's harsh words haunted you for days. Maybe you replayed the conversation in your head, drafted imaginary comebacks in the shower, even lost sleep running through scenarios. That mental loop wasn't free, it cost you focus, creativity, and peace. Now imagine if you'd treated that critique like spam mail, glanced at it, recognized its lack of value, and deleted it without another thought. The difference isn't in the criticism itself, but in the emotional transaction fees you chose to pay. History offers a striking parallel in Eleanor Roosevelt's approach to public attacks. As First Lady, she faced relentless scrutiny. Critics mocked her voice, her appearance, even her humanitarian work. But she maintained an almost superhuman calm by reframing anger as currency. In her diaries, she described visualizing each insult as a bill she could choose to pay or return to sender. The insults didn't stop, but her expenditures did. Here's the breakthrough realization. Anger doesn't punish the critic, it taxes you. When a coworker dismisses your idea, their words are free. It's your reaction that carries the cost. The Stoics called this the double harm principle. First, the criticism lands, then you amplify its damage by letting it colonize your mind. Marcus Aurelius warned specifically against this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Consider this mental audit over the past month. What criticism drained you disproportionately? Was it the offhand comment about your presentation style? The relative who scoffed at your life choices? Now calculate the interest, the hours of rumination, the lost productivity, the tension carried in your shoulders. That's your energy tax at work. The alternative isn't suppression, it's selective investment. When criticism comes, ask, is this worth withdrawing my limited emotional reserves? If there's truth to unpack, make a deliberate deposit, spend energy on growth, not resentment. But if it's just noise, close the ledger. Your mind deserves better dividends than bitterness. After all, as Seneca noted, no one can insult you without your cooperation, and every moment you refuse to pay that tax is another moment rich with possibility. There's a moment in every great comeback story when the hero stops explaining why they stumbled and starts building what comes next. That pivot from defense to action is the heart of amor fati, the Stoic practice of loving one's fate, including the criticism that shapes it. Picture a tech startup whose initial app receives brutal reviews, clunky interface, frustrating navigation. The founders could spend weeks justifying their design choices, or they could channel Epictetus's command, "Don't explain, show." Within months, they launch a redesigned version that addresses every critique, turning detractors into advocates. That's amor fati in motion, not just accepting feedback, but embracing it as the raw material for reinvention. History brims with these transformations. When Thomas Edison's early light bulb prototypes failed, newspapers mocked him as the man who invented darkness. Instead of firing back, he famously replied, "I haven't failed, I've found 10,000 ways that won't work." Each critique became a compass needle pointing toward improvement. The Stoics took this further, suggesting we celebrate harsh feedback as the universe's way of course-correcting us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way, not by accident, but because we choose to walk it." Here's the shift that changes everything. Criticism stops being something you endure and starts being something you use. A chef doesn't weep over a diner's complaint that the soup lacks spice, they reach for the salt. A novelist doesn't rage at an editor's red ink, they revise. The moment you trade "why are they wrong" for "what can I do better," you've activated amor fati. So here's your challenge. Pick one piece of recent criticism, whether from a colleague, a friend, or your own inner critic, and answer Epictetus's question, "What's one step I can take today to improve?" Not a grand overhaul, but a single, actionable tweak. Maybe it's rehearsing your presentation one more time to smooth the rough edges someone noted. Maybe it's finally signing up for that course to strengthen the skill others say you lack. Action is the ultimate rebuttal. Think of a potter shaping clay. Every thumbprint, every groove left by the wheel isn't a flaw, it's part of the creation. That's the spirit of amor fati, loving the process, including the pressure that molds you. Because the critics might define your starting point, but only you decide the finish. Imagine your eulogy being read aloud. Not the polished version edited for polite company, but the raw, honest truth. What would it say about how you handled criticism? Would it describe someone who fired back at every slight, or someone who met judgment with quiet dignity? This is the legacy lens, the Stoic practice of filtering criticism through the question, does engaging with this serve the person I aspire to be remembered as? Marcus Aurelius cut to the heart of it. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one. History preserves a telling moment from Gandhi's life when a British journalist baited him with insults, hoping for a fiery rebuttal. Gandhi simply smiled and said, "Your opinion doesn't define me, but your need to voice it defines you." That exchange didn't make headlines that day, but it became foundational to how Gandhi is remembered, not for the battles he fought, but for the battles he refused to dignify. The legacy lens forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We're often one reactive email or one impulsive comment away from overshadowing years of integrity. Consider two neighbors locked in a years-long feud over a property line. One insists on being right, the other refuses to back down. Fast forward decades, their grandchildren won't remember who technically owned 3 extra feet of land. They'll remember the pettiness that poisoned family gatherings. Now contrast that with the legacy of someone like Fred Rogers, who faced critics accusing his television show of coddling children. Instead of attacking, he doubled down on kindness, saying, "Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun like struggle." Today, we don't recall his detractors. We celebrate the legacy he deliberately built, one gracious response at a time. Here's the litmus test. The next time criticism tempts you to react, pause and project forward. Picture your biographer writing this moment. Would they describe it as they stood firm in their values, or they got dragged into the mud? Marcus Aurelius kept this lens sharp by asking, what's stronger, the words thrown at you, or the silence you choose to keep. Silence isn't weakness, it's the mortar holding together a legacy no critic can crack. Think of a recent criticism that hooked you. Maybe it was a social media jab or a coworker's condescending tone. Now mentally fast forward to your 80th birthday. Will this exchange matter then? If not, you've just uncovered a priceless truth. Some battles aren't worth winning because the victory leaves scars on your character. The critics of your life will fade. Your choices in facing them won't. So when in doubt, ask the legacy question. What response would make my grandchildren proud? That answer holds the only validation you'll ever need. So there you have it, 20 pieces of Stoic armor to shield you from the sharpest criticisms life can throw your way. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, each insight we've explored, from the pause between reaction and response, to the cosmic perspective, to the alchemy of humor, adds another layer of resilience. But here's the truth no one tells you. This armor isn't something you put on once and forget. It's forged in the daily fires of practice, choice by choice. Grace under fire isn't a trait you're born with. It's a muscle that strengthens every time you choose curiosity over defensiveness, action over resentment, and silence over sinking to their level. Epictetus, who endured slavery before shaping Stoic philosophy, left us with perhaps the ultimate key. No one can hurt you without your consent. Not because criticism doesn't sting, but because its lasting power lives or dies by what you do next. Do you let it fester, or do you wield it like a whetstone, sharpening your character against its edge? That's the invitation Stoicism extends, not a life free from criticism, but one where criticism loses its power to derail you. Now it's your turn. Which piece of armor will you test first? Maybe it's the Stoic pause before reacting to that infuriating email. Maybe it's the journaling habit to depersonalize harsh words. Or perhaps it's simply asking, will this matter in 5 years? As you scroll past a cruel comment, whatever you choose, share it below, because the most powerful lessons grow when we learn them together. Remember, the critics of your life will come and go, but the way you handle them, that becomes your legacy, and that's entirely yours to write.